Gold thieves are already out on bail. Yeah, because they pose much less of a risk than like Tamara Lich or the Coots guys. Let those guys out on bail right away, right? Toot to sweet. They were caught yesterday and they're like, oh, that's a load of gold off my mind. I'm going to the gym. There's video of that. And it's already made it to the House of Commons. So that's pretty funny. Tim Hortons has pizza now. That's weird. That's weird. Remember when McDonald's did pizza? I remember you could win McDonald's pizza on global news by calling like a 1-800 number. And my brother and I were maniacal. We were trying to win this pizza. I don't know why. And somebody on our street won the pizza, but it wasn't us. And so, but then we went to McDonald's to eat the pizza because my parents were good parents and they were like, you really want to try this pizza? All right, we'll go and try the pizza. And it was okay. It didn't last at McDonald's, we'll tell you that. So I wonder how long this pizza will last. We'll see. Anita Anand is kind of upset about having to answer about a ArriveCAN, and she gets real close to the microphone. It's kind of funny as a visual, but you can tell she's upset about the whole thing, which made me laugh. Carbon taxes we're going to talk about. Budget reactions we're going to talk about. There's lots to get to. Let's get to it first. Ryan Garrettson says, our government still thinks that if they change the name, we'll forget it's a scam tax. So CTV News is reporting Ottawa to force banks to call carbon rebate a carbon rebate in direct deposits. Do you think the government forced the newspapers to call the carbon tax redistribution a carbon rebate? Right? We're going to take your money. And then we're going to take some of it and give some of it back to you. And we're going to call that a rebate. And we can't talk at all about the first part of that where all of that money comes from the citizen. No, it's a rebate. CTV News, this is Ottawa to force banks to call carbon rebate a carbon rebate in direct deposits. It's just funny. Here it is. Trudeau has tried to bait fury with name calling over carbon tax views, Premier says. So that's fury. So now I'll know. Actually, I'm not very good with faces. I forget faces quite a lot. Global News is reporting Ontario Premier calls cost of gas absolutely disgusting, raises price gouging concerns. Yeah, there's somebody gouging the price, all right. It's the government, and the taxes on energy are too damn high, honestly. Doug Ford is in the position to make big changes, but he's not allowed to because I think it's clear maybe somebody else is in charge. And actually, Pierre Poilievre makes a joke during the election series of tabs. We're going to start it off with that joke that he does. But he's saying that it's somebody other than Justin Trudeau in charge. And, it's a pretty funny joke. But Doug Ford is actually in a position to do something meaningful about those taxes and about that price gouging that the government is doing on gas, on energy that shouldn't be done at all. And he's not doing anything. He's saying, somebody along the line is taking more than their fair share. It's Doug Ford, right? It's Doug Ford, buddy. Honestly, obvious to me, but it seems like the politicians just can't figure it out. Wonder why that is, right? If you're paid, if your career depends on you not understanding something, then that thing will be very difficult for you to understand. CBC Watcher says, this is a highlight from this Niagara Independent article. If the 2024 budget document is any reflection of the conduct Canadians can expect from the Trudeau Liberals in the next 20 months, Poilievre will assume office to assess how to make the most of what is left of the country's scorched earth. So he's saying that this is a scorched earth budget. And yeah, I don't think he's far off. I think his reasoning is sound. Fundamentally, I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday and they said, do you think the budget will pass or not? And I said, oh yeah, it'll pass. Yes, 100% it'll pass, but nothing in it will actually get done. And I cited the dental thing. Like, their policies don't work. Nobody's on board with them. Everybody's just waiting for an election. Poilievre in this episode of this show says, basically Jagmeet Singh is waiting until he gets his pension. So we're going to have to wait until January 2025. But even if this budget passes, which it probably will, a lot of the stuff in it is not going to have much force, right? It's not going to be in effect for a long time. Fingers crossed. That's my prediction, right? That's what I think is going to happen. I don't think that Jagmeet Singh is going to trigger an election over this because he'd lose, and he knows it. He knows it. He'd probably keep his seat because he's the leader and whatever, high profile. Lots of people will vote for him. And I think the elections are rigged, right? But I don't think that I don't think the election is rigged enough to combat the polls that we've seen, or you don't get the prime minister job unless you've been approved by the powers that be, right? So we'll get an election when they decide we'll get an election. And then Poilievre will do a lot of the things that he's promising to do, but then he's going to he's going to try and achieve the goals of the 2030 agenda in a quote different way, using efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He'll build 15-minute cities. So there's issues, right? There's issues. I'm not saying that there's not issues. I'm just saying probably my prediction is sometime after January 2025 is when the government will fall. My prediction. Here's the Niagara Independent talking about this budget. A scorched earth approach refers to an intent to deliberately destroy everything as one retreats so that your advancing opponent is left with nothing of value. It's a malevolent military maneuver outlawed by the Geneva Convention that is described in the classic 19th century manuscript on war by Karl von Clausewitz. I scroll down just a little bit. The federal budget presented this week has been likened to a scorched earth document, a parting testament for the hapless and increasingly unpopular Trudeau Liberals. Political commentator Spencer Fernando writes of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's current disposition. As he faces terrible poll numbers, he is willing to burn the country down on his way out in what appears to be a combination of desperate spending to try and stay in power in the short term and a desire to punish the nation in the long term for daring to turn against him. So, yeah. It's not just me that thinks that this is a vindictive budget. And again, that I don't think that this is going to have much force in anything. It seems like Trudeau's desperately flailing around, and he doesn't look strong in this budget, in my opinion. David says, Canada's in trouble. This is the 9th budget in a row that depends heavily on excessive borrowing or borrowed money managed by an obese, bloated federal bureaucracy that is now 40% larger and 68% more costly than when the Liberals took power in 2015. Unwilling to live within the tax revenues produced by the national economy, this government has borrowed more money in 8 years than all other Canadian governments combined since the nation was founded in 1867. This recklessness has doubled the national debt and created interest payments that are breaking all records. Last year, over $46 billion, and this coming year, over $54 billion. That is more than the federal government spends on the military or healthcare, all of it taken from taxpayers to pay bondholders instead of being spent on public service. You know, I think is funny. NATO, they say, we'd really recommend that you pay 2% for defense, right? Defense is a big deal, right? You got to defend your country and stuff. Or that used to be something that you should be able to do. Now, I guess defending your country means dressing up in a dress if you're a man and, opening the borders, like carrying luggage for invaders. I'm not really sure, but defense used to be a big deal. And 2% was the minimum for NATO membership. And Canada, I don't think, has ever spent 2%. And we're not projected to spend 2%. But if the interest rates go up, it's not a suggestion. You have to pay those interest rates. Why is that? Why can Canada just be like, yeah, we're going to spend, 1.3%, 1.4%-ish on defense. Thanks, NATO. We're gonna not do this exercise this time because gas is real expensive. If you've seen the pumps, right? Like, how can Canada shrug their shoulders at NATO, which seems like a very big responsibility? You've got to do your duty to NATO or whatever. Even though the reason for NATO no longer exists, but I digress. They're trying to make it exist again. But fundamentally, we're not meeting our obligations to the world or to the citizens of this country, but the banks, man, top notch, right? Like we better pay those bills, right? And the next increase of interest payments is going to be $80 billion from $54 billion. So that's not great. Right? That's not great at all. That's more than the federal government spends on the military or healthcare, right? All of it taken from taxpayers to pay bondholders instead of being spent on public service. Now, the centerpiece of their new budget is a capital gains tax targeting the few Canadian individuals and firms who invest in Canadian ventures or assets. This investment is what creates new businesses and jobs and productivity the nation so badly needs. It is bizarre to watch a morbidly obese, fiscally incompetent government propose, in the name of fairness, to justify taking productive capital away from Canada's small but critical investor class and hand it to the same bureaucracy that has for almost a decade shown they will only waste it. The track record is anything but fair. Inflationary, reckless borrowing, uncompetitive taxes, and obesely expanded bureaucracy and debt, underperforming public services, runaway interest payments, and a regulatory state that kills industrial expansion and economic momentum. The world is noticing. The OECD now measures Canada dead last of the world's 38 advanced economies for per capita GDP productivity modeled to 2030 and 2060. Since that 2021 analysis, the nation has lost ground on GDP productivity for another 6 of the last 8 quarters. On a purchasing power basis, Canadian GDP per capita is down to 76% of the USA. That's with outlier Alberta rising the national GDP numbers significantly. On a provincial basis, 46 out of the 50 states are now wealthier than Ontario. And if Quebec was a US state, it would be the 49th poorest, only marginally ahead of Mississippi. The government needs to ask itself how fair it is to add another $39.9 billion in debt this coming year as they lose over $54 billion in interest payments to bondholders instead of spending it on public services. The real social injustice in this budget is the borrowed money that is killing the opportunity society Canada is supposed to be and the next generation deserves by avoiding hard decisions and taxing investors instead of cutting their own reckless spending. This government is creating a future of forced austerity for our kids. You can call that a lot of things, but it isn't fairness. So, yeah, there's a lot of people pushing back. Here's Danielle Smith pushing back on the budget, and it's 5 seconds. So here we go.
They're overspending, they're overtaxing, they're overborrowing, and they're over-interfering in our jurisdiction.
Yeah. So there you go. To the point, direct, right? True North has Chrystia Freeland, who's anything but to the point or direct. And she likes to sniff the microphone. They say Finance Minister Freeland says the government is careful in the way it spends money. Not really. She meanders here. We're going to listen to about a minute, I guess. She may not get to the part where they say we're careful in the way they spend money. But I just got bored listening. Here we go.
We absolutely believe that it is important for the federal government, for any government, to be careful in the way that we spend money. It's not our money. It is the money of Canadians, and they quite rightly expect us to be really thoughtful about what we spend it on. That's why it was really important for me in this budget to announce that over 4 years, you're going to see a decline in the size of the public service by 5,000 people. That is really significant. And
it sounds like aging out. It sounds more like aging out. So she said it right at the beginning. I think I started the clip a minute in, and then I have to go back to the beginning, which is why I didn't hear it properly when I previewed it. But fundamentally, they're saying the things that Canadians want to hear sometimes, right? Like saying, oh, we don't view this as our money. We view this as Canadians' money we're spending on their behalf. But then they do things like ArriveCAN. And that's the exact opposite of what they said, right? So they could have the rules, they could have the intention, they can even have the rhetoric, but they don't actually do any of that, right? And the budget isn't fair, and there's been a couple of people illustrating why it's not fair. Here's another one. ERDoc is highlighting this TorontoLife.com piece on this doctor. Another day, another family doctor forced to close their practice. Is anyone listening? Why must everything become a crisis before we respond? And basically, this tells a story of a doctor who was in a bigger clinic, and then other doctors started leaving, and then the practice became financially not viable, and it just got worse and worse, and leading to burnout. And ERDoc says, an important read for those who think all doctors are rich. This is why you don't have a family doctor. Why should someone who studied for over 10 years in post-secondary education and accumulated massive debt subsidize the great free Canadian healthcare system? $37 per visit to keep the lights on. Wow, such disrespect from government and patients alike. And so the article kind of breaks down. Well, I'll read it just a bit of it. She says, hold on, I had some of it highlighted. Family doctors sharing a practice don't share income, but we do pool expenses, rent, our secretary's salary, the cost of office supplies. Each of us is paid by the government for every appointment. Currently, the rate is $37 per appointment, plus another $3 or so if they happen to be enrolled in the government's family health care program or health plan program. We also get a fee for each patient, with rates varying based on their sex and age. with my roughly 1,000 patients, that comes out to about 2,000 per month. When I was first building my practice, I made about 90,000 per year after all our office expenses were accounted for. In 2022, that figure was about 142,000. For your typical family doctor, family medicine isn't the pathway to luxury people imagine it is. For a while, the practice managed to do all right financially. We've been totally full since I started. By 2015, though, 2 of the doctors I originally shared the practice with left for larger operations. With just 2 of us left, we couldn't afford to keep our nurse, and by the time we got back to 3 doctors, we couldn't hire a new nurse because hospitals were offering far better salaries than we could ever offer. And there are other issues as well. So, yeah, the healthcare system that we are relying on doesn't work very well from a structural standpoint. It's not good at delivering healthcare because doctors also have to be business people who run offices. You know what I mean? Like, and they're the boss and they pay all the salaries, et cetera, et cetera. They depend on the patients coming in, all that stuff. But it's a poor model because like you could be one hell of a doctor, but a really terrible business person, right? Like, so how do you deal with that, right? So yikes. Melissa says, wow, more than 150 CEOs and Canadian tech leaders have published an open letter to the Trudeau government to stop the proposed capital gains tax announced in the new Liberal budget. Read and add your name. Link is in the description if you're interested. I'm not going to read through it. Everybody's kind of saying this is a terrible tax. This is a terrible idea. All of the things you're doing are harmful and not helpful. Please stop. And the Liberals come out and say the things that they think the people want to hear. Sometimes they get it right, but the actions betray their words. Colin says, Chrystia Freeland claims the Liberal government doesn't need to eliminate the carbon tax because they've already made life more affordable by providing dental care, contraceptives, and free diabetes medication. I mean, that'll get you through a hungry winter, right? Like, just take your diabetes medication. That curbs the hunger pangs. Here we go.
I'm with CHCH News. My question is about the gas prices today. Many people are seeing that gas prices have risen 14 cents today, and I'm wondering if the government is prepared to consider either eliminating or lowering the carbon tax to help offset those costs.
Okay, thank you for your question, and we really recognize that affordability is a big question in the lives of people across Canada. It's a big question in the lives of people here in Burlington. And that's why the budget has a lot of measures in place to make life more affordable. Dental care is rolling out. By next year, 9 million Canadians are going to have dental care. That's going to help a lot of people. We are making diabetes medications and contraceptives free for Canadians. That's going to make a real difference in the cost of everyone's lives. I am really, really happy about the National School Food Program that we've announced. We are going to start rolling it out in September.
It's all just stump speech, right? It's not actually addressing the issues. These are the spending initiatives we're going to use to buy your vote. But replacing, like putting a carbon tax on everything and making everything unaffordable and then saying, listen, we're paying for your diabetes medication, just isn't going to cut it. Here's a $17 watermelon in Ottawa, in a metro in Ottawa. Okay. Seen in a metro in Ottawa. Thanks, Justin Trudeau. So there's your $16.99, my metro. I mean, they look like big watermelons, but they probably... Is April watermelon season? Like, are you thinking to yourself, man, I can't wait to drink straight from the hose and eat some watermelon in April? Like, sometimes it snows in April. CTV News says, frustrated farmers. This made me laugh. This headline made me laugh. Frustrated farmers rebelling against EU rules. The far right is stoking the flames. The far right. Yes, those evil far right farmers, right? Oh my gosh, they're so mean. Making all that food, those mean far right farmers. Honestly, they're blaming the far right, and I just highlighted the part. Farmers and the EU have had a sometimes testy relationship. What's new is the shift towards the extreme right. So they have to bring in their ridiculous rhetoric into all of this. This is just highlighting the European protests all across Europe and Germany and the Netherlands. This is highlighting a farm in the Netherlands. But they're really trying to use it to vilify and label people far right if they align with these people who seem to be fighting for freedom and the ability to continue farming the way they've farmed for hundreds of years. So it's kind of weird, right? It's kind of strange that the EU thinks they know better. I don't necessarily think they know better. They just want to implement policy that they've been convinced will save humanity or some such nonsense. Danielle Smith says, we're not going to allow electricity bills to cause Albertans hardship and confusion. That's why our government is announcing the following changes to make life more affordable. Regulated rate. Now, this is a bit confusing, and I don't know if it's because I'm not in Alberta or if it's confusing because it's actually confusing. It might actually be confusing. And if it's confusing, that's not great, right? The policy should be simple to understand. And as it sits here, I'm going to need to read more. Like there's a release here and there's a link so you can check it out. And I haven't, but I think it's confusing. Regulated rate option changes to rate of last resort and will be set every 2 years for each provider, resulting in fewer price spikes. So regulated rate option changes. I don't know how often they're changes. I don't know how often they're changed now. So going to every 2 years maybe will bring stabilization if it was updated every month. But that could be a pain if it's updated every month. Maybe it's updated more than that. Anyone who signs on to the rate of last resort will be able to choose a different competitive rate plan at any time. What's the incentive to not be on the rate of last resort? Could I just sign up to the rate? Like if I go into a restaurant, oftentimes, not dinners, but at dinner time, I'll split an entree with somebody, usually, because there's way too much food, or I'll bring half home. But at lunchtime, I'll eat from the kids' menu. Like if I'm at McDonald's or wherever, I'll eat from the kids' menu. If I'm at Taco Bell, it's like I'll have a fries supreme maybe, or a burrito, right, and a fries supreme if I'm feeling saucy. But usually that's probably 600 too many calories. So, it's one of those things where sometimes they look at you sideways. You have to be a certain age or something like that. Is there some kind of incentive? Is there some kind of reason that you wouldn't sign up for the lowest possible rate you could get? Like, give me the rate of last resort. Yeah, I don't care. Like, I don't care what it sounds like. Is it the cheapest one? That's the one I want. If there's limitations to it that you maybe wouldn't want, then fine. But and then maybe I wouldn't sign up for it, right? But again, I don't know what the rate of last resort is. They'll be able to choose a different competitive rate plan at any time. Why wouldn't everybody get that option? Power providers will be required to inform customers exactly what rate they're on and advise them to switch to a competitive rate at any time. Why doesn't everybody get the rate of last resort? Like, energy should be as cheap as possible, as close to zero as possible. We should make so much energy that it's almost free. That will make people richer because they will need less money to pay for energy. And if you can get energy, then, the rest, chocolate cereal is a couple stages down that line. But if energy is cheap, then we got to work on the price of cocoa. I know. I'm watching. I'm checking. Here is Pierre Poilievre, and he's talking about, this is a funny joke. It's a funny joke, and I thought it was funny. So well done, Mr. Poilievre. Here we go. Check this out.
The Prime Minister wants you to know that the status quo is unacceptable, that Canada has become an unfair country where young people, an entire generation, cannot afford a home and families cannot afford food. And if he finds out who's been running this place for the last 9 years, there will be hell to pay. Will the Prime Minister complete his investigation and tell us who's been in charge for the last decade?
That's pretty funny, right? I don't know, stuff like that. I don't know why people keep putting music, and it seems too loud to me. But this is an interview on breakfast television, I guess. And Contrarian's sharing this. He says, how on earth do the NDP and Jagmeet Singh still have any support? So this is Poilievre talking about how we're going to have to wait until January 25 for Jagmeet to get his pension. Here we go.
Jagmeet Singh that he will support or not support this budget moving forward, which would of course trickle into an election if he does not support this.
Let's be honest, Jagmeet Singh is only concerned about his pension. Let's cut the crap, right? He has to wait until January of 2025 to be eligible for a pension. So he's worried that if the election happens and he loses, he won't have a pension. So he's making everyone pay the massive bill of keeping Justin Trudeau around so that he can get to pension eligibility and continue to fund his fancy suits and watches and Beamers, and that's what he's all about. It's a greedy position, but that's what you got with JAG.
There you go. So sorry about the loud kind of dance music there. I find it hard to hear what they're saying when people layer over dance music like that. So I usually try and find clean clips, but I don't have time this morning, so apologies. I have a meeting and then another meeting, and I have to go after that. So no time this morning. Ken says, this was odd. This is the elections tab. So people are putting forward their policies and saying all the right things. Basically, the job of a politician is to read the room, read the crowd, read the electorate, and say what's bothering them best and tell a story of how you're going to fix it best. That's the basic job of a politician. So Justin Trudeau, a couple of years ago, promised to plant 2 billion trees, and a couple of years ago also promised to reduce your cell phone bill by 25%. And today yesterday, he's claiming success on the cell phone one. He says, "We've cut the cost of cell phone plans in half since 2019, in part by increasing competition. Next, we're going after the junk fees of your phone bill so you can do things like cancel your plan or switch to a cheaper one with no additional charges." And a whole bunch of people are responding to Trudeau saying, "I have receipts from 2019 that I'm looking at right now, and my cell phone bill is either exactly the same or it's more now than it was in 2019. What are you talking about? You haven't done any such thing, Justin Trudeau." And so Ken says, whose cell phone costs went down? Anyone? Amelia says, "Mine went up." Right? "That's impossible," says Justin Trudeau. Mike is sharing this one. "In 2021, the Liberals promised a CBD that would reduce poverty like the GIS and CCB. The GIS has a max of $1,000 per month per person. Yesterday, the feds proposed a CDB with a maximum of $200 a month, delayed until mid-2025, full of barriers. This isn't what the disability community called for." And so, yeah, they're electioneering, but it's a pittance, right? And the $666 a day, yeah, right. We see you. We understand what you're trying to communicate. Here's the responses to Justin Trudeau's cell phone tweet. Notalia says, "Of all the Trudeau promises that didn't happen, this didn't happen the most." Flex says, "You are insane. No one's cell phone plans have decreased at all, let alone 50%. You just made this up." Has the cost of your cell phone bill been cut in half since 2019? Yes or no? I'd say no. 11,000, almost 12,000 votes, 94% no. So the lie detector says so, right? Jagmeet saying yesterday, it's funny because he's doubling down, and the more he doubles down, the dumber he looks about this whole thing. And this TikTok video editing stuff is really, maybe it works for millennials. It doesn't work for me. This is a no for me, dog. Jagmeet Singh says, 2 words that caused Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives to have a complete meltdown. Jagmeet Singh calls the corporations, a vague descriptor of corporations, the CPC's masters. And they get upset by that. You hear the yelling as soon as he says the masters thing. And he goes on saying, "Oh, they're upset because I'm talking about corporate greed that they're protecting." But it's super interesting that he's reimagining, like he just baited them into yelling. And then he's telling his audience the reason they're yelling is because they like corporate greed. And it's like, well, hold on. They're actually taking offense at the term you just used, that you just insulted them with. It has nothing to do with corporate greed. It has everything to do with the rhetoric used in the House of Commons floor. It's really just wild and crazy. And immature. It feels very immature. It feels very high school election, not a serious country election. Like there's a whole thing in the Ontario legislature right now about the Palestinian, or I can't remember which one it is because I've definitely been ignoring the story because I feel like it's a huge wizard circle. It is a distraction. You could have all opinions, all Israel, all day long, and get nowhere. But anyway, I think it's a distraction story, but I just want to tell you about it. They banned the Kurfka or whatever it's called. And And you've got everybody like Jagmeet Singh saying you can't do this. You've got the Attorney General saying you can't ban this, blah, 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 blah. Nobody would care. Nobody would care. This is Canada. This is not Israel, Palestine, or anything in between. Like, this is Canada, for crying out loud. Anyway, very, very, we get stuck in wizard circles arguing about things that don't matter and that we can't change because it's not our country. And instead of arguing about things that we can change in our country, we get stuck arguing about things we can't change outside of our country. And that's bad. I think that's bad. And part of it is the infantilization of the adults in our country. Nobody thinks that they're responsible for being in charge and holding these people accountable. Everybody thinks it's somebody else's responsibility. It's not. It's all of our responsibility. Here's Jagmeet Singh and this stupid video.
Conservatives, they're afraid anytime we mention corporate greed because they want to defend those corporations. So when will the Liberals finally take on...
There are some members in this place who, like the Speaker, had difficulty hearing the member from Burnaby South. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Burnaby South to start again his question.
I know what happens. Anytime I take on corporate greed, the Conservatives get really upset because we're taking on their masters, so they get upset about it. But I'll be careful not to say too much because I know the Conservatives get so angry when we mention corporate greed. But what happens is young people are seeing they're getting ripped off with rent, they're getting ripped off with groceries, getting ripped off with the high cost of cell phone fees, and they know it's because of corporate greed. The Conservatives don't want me to talk about this, but will the Liberals take on corporate greed, which is driving up the cost of living?
It's carbon tax. The reason that everything costs more is because of the carbon tax. It has nothing to do with corporate greed. It has everything to do with carbon tax. Jagmeet Singh again's electioneering. He says the price of Pierre, $60 billion in corporate handouts. No to feeding kids who go hungry. It's the carbon tax that makes kids hungry, Jagmeet. Carbon tax, not 60 billion. If you're giving money to oil and gas companies and the oil and gas companies are making power, then that's usually a good deal, not a bad deal, because nothing else can make power. Well, there are other things that can make power, but we're not allowed to talk about them. Stephanie Cusey says, there are 2 RCMP investigations currently underway connected to GC strategies, including a raid on Kristen Firth's home on Tuesday. We've learned that one of the contracts awarded to GC strategies has links to Deputy Prime Minister Freeland's office. What else will we find out about the Liberals' relationship with this shoddy company? So Stephanie Cusey is holding these guys responsible. Michael Barrett is having a back and forth here, and Trudeau's minister laughs when asked about her officials being wined and dined at steakhouses by a ArriveCAN. This is Anita Anand getting very upset with the line of questioning. It's about a minute in, but we'll listen to the whole setup because it's worthwhile. Here we go.
Top ArriveCAN contractor, GC Strategies owner Christian Firth had his home raided by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police 2 days ago as part of the Mounties investigation to his work with the Trudeau government. Christian Firth is well documented as part of the more than dozen investigations into his role with government contracting for fraud, forgery. He has a track record of meeting some of the most senior public servants at bars and steakhouses. Minister, do you think that's normal?
I was not here at that time as president of the Treasury Board. However, I would expect that rules would be followed at every instance. Because I was not here, I am not certain if the rules were followed, and I will ask my colleague to respond.
So, the Minister, it's a question of judgment. The question is, do you think Canadians find it acceptable that millionaire consultants are discussing government contracts with senior officials, many who control these contracts, and are chatting over whiskey and steak about getting paid with taxpayer money? Do you think Canadians find that acceptable?
I do not know exactly what occurred, but I don't find it acceptable to violate any rule or principle. There is an importance of letting the RCMP do their work. I am not, as a Minister of the Crown, going to interfere in the investigation of an independent organization. And I think it is important that we let that investigation continue. And then, as the Minister of Public Safety has said, we look forward to following the recommendations of the RCMP.
When you lean forward and you grab the microphone and you get real close to it and enunciate things extra carefully, you might be tipping your hand a little bit, showing how frustrated you are by the whole situation. But I think it's interesting that she wants to delay talking about anything like this until the RCMP have finished their investigation. Have they finished the investigation into the Nova Scotia shooting yet? Have we seen a report that's been worth anything at all, or are we just gonna totally like that's not happening? I remember they came out and they said a couple of things, and then people were very unsatisfied. And the real report is by there's a civilian in Nova Scotia, who's got like kind of what's actually happened, but that's not part of the official report, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't trust the RCMP. I don't trust Anita Anand, even if she's upset and grabs the microphone and says, "I wasn't there. That's not my fault." Well, it is now, right? It's in your ballpark now. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to canadapoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful